So an unleashed leader, right, is one to me that you make it okay for everyone to turn their light on. And what you'll find is that when you walk in the room, it actually brightens up. Why? Because everybody's light is on. And that's the brightest that it will ever be. And I think that's a powerful thing for a leader.
Welcome to the Unleashing Leaders podcast, where we work with willing leaders to accelerate the changes you seek. We'll learn from the experiences of different leaders facing real challenges and distill practical, purposeful steps to apply in your context. I'm Lee Scott, your curious co-pilot. Together, let's make positive changes for our companies and communities. Welcome back to the Unleashing Leaders podcast. Today, we are excited to be joined by John Brown. He is the Chief Operations Officer for GEHA Health, about 1,500 employees based in Kansas City, which that might come up in our conversation a little bit, some excitement going on in that town. And he is here today to talk about two main things. One, how do you as an individual progress as a leader, adapting across different functions as your career path takes those inevitable twists and turns? And then also, how do we as leaders prepare our organizations to be more adaptable, facing the uncertainties on the horizon? John, great to have you on the show.
Great to be here. Thanks, Lee.
So, John, tell us a little bit about GEHA, Government Employee Health Association. What do you guys do and who do you serve?
Absolutely. Thank you. So GEHA, we are a nonprofit organization that we serve as military, retired military, servicemen and women and their families and federal employees. So we serve approximately 2 million members nationwide, and we currently have approximately 1,500 employees who are part of the organization. Domiciled or located primarily here in Kansas City, but we do have employees that are spread across different parts of the U.S., particularly driven by the pandemic and some of the challenges there where we wanted to get access to talent. And so having talent that could reside anywhere in the country and not have to move to KC, although it's a great city, was certainly good for us as well.
Nice. So really being able to break that geographical chokehold on access to labor, which many folks are figuring out how to do that better.
Correct.
Well, wonderful. Well, tell us a little about your origin story, John. I mean, you're currently the COO, but you've had a couple of twists and turns in your career. Starting out as an engineering student, I mean, how does an engineer become a leader?
I think the best visual to sort of use as the backdrop to what I'm about to say is a ladder versus lattice, right? Ladder versus lattice. So yeah, my undergrad is in electronics engineering, and interestingly enough, I've never done a day of engineering in my life. By having the degree of engineering, what I did coming out of college is I had the opportunity to work for Southwestern Bell, where they had a leadership development program that gave me access to 3 specific disciplines: financial, technical, and customer service. And so as an engineer, the thinking was, well, I know I'm just going to really fall into that technical space. But interestingly enough, it was during my 1 year in customer service that I found my calling, my sweet spot, right? And so after that 3-year program, I spent years, actually about 25 years in customer service, running large service organizations for different companies. But it was a nice balance of both technical, but also people. I learned very quickly, and I'm thankful for that, that I really enjoyed working with and serving people. And that was not going to be nearly as accessible in a technical path, right, as an engineer, as it would be in the service space. And so back to the ladder versus lattice, a lot of us think of our careers as you're here and then you move linear up here, another rung on the ladder, when the reality is, though I started in engineering, moved to customer service, then to human resources, now the chief operating officer, where I have responsibility for multiple functions, it's been the lattice. You got to move left sometimes before you move up. You move right, you move back, then you move up. It's more of the lattice concept that I would encourage your listeners to really focus on, because it prevents a lot of discouragement, where some folks think that I'm here, if I don't move to this rung of the ladder, somehow I failed. But if you look at it as a lattice and you find yourself moving around, as an engineering student, we learn quickly that, the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line, but our careers don't work that way, right? It moves all over the place.
You hear that expression, and it's like going, well, hey, you're making a change. Like, going, yeah, but it's a lateral move. And as if that's a bad thing. It's like, how in the world would you be effective as a COO today if you hadn't had journeys in the customer service, the HR, right? It just makes you that much more effective. Let's zoom in on one of those transitions, because we can all say that it's going to be a lattice, and we can even say it's better that it's a lattice, but it doesn't make it easy that it's a lattice. So in particular, there was a part where you went from having been in customer service, and then you made an even crazier career shift, engineering to customer service. Then you went into HR, and that's like a whole other, that's not even a planet, that's a different solar system. Tell us about what that experience was, and what can we learn as leaders when we're making careers into different areas or different professions than maybe what we natively grew up in.
After, again, over 25 years in service, I made the transition to human resources. And really one of the basic reasons and the reasons for making that move was really twofold. One was I had spent so many years in customer service sitting across the table from HR. And again, I worked with some very great HR organizations and some that maybe weren't as great. Again, this is not to be critical, but the reality was, as a service operations leader, I worked so very often with HR departments that just by nature had become, the principal's office or clean up aisle 7. They were not partners, right? And so for me as a business leader, I really needed an HR organization that could learn my business enough. I didn't need them to be business experts or operations experts, but I needed them to understand the business enough to enable and to support so that we could win more, we could do more, do better. And I was not getting that as much as I could have. So the transition for me was logical. It was, if I desire that in a human resources organization, then go create it, right? Versus complain about it not being available. And so that transition was exactly what was the motivation behind the transition. And like most other disciplines, HR or technology, et cetera, those areas can be quite insular, right? And so you have someone from the outside coming in. It sort of looks like, what is he doing here, right? What are his motives, right? Which is, my motives are to help us as an organization be the best we can be by supporting it. So having that operations lens for so many years and moving to HR, what it did allow me to do was to, number one, really make it clear that if an HR organization can truly be partners with the operation, learn the business enough to be able to help enable, the initiatives that the organization has, they'll be much better received. And as an organization, you're just going to do better. But it took some work because going in and being really clear by getting, the designations and all else, that was necessary. Not so much for me feeling I needed to do it, but for the organization to know that this transition is not just fly by night. I'm serious about coming over and making a difference.
John, there's a couple of really good nuggets that you have in there. Kuzes and Posner have a book, The Leadership Challenge, and they talk about, the 5 exemplary leadership practices. And you've highlighted at least 3 of them, maybe even 4. But, one of the things you talked about is like going, hey, if you have a challenge with something, don't just be a critic throwing stones, right? Like suit up and get in there, right? See what you can do with it. And so that really kind of aligns with this notion of model the way, right? It's like if you want something to be
Right.
different, you got to be
That's
different,
right.
and you took it literally to say, well, I'm going to go and embed myself in that. You don't just show up and it's like, hey, but I have all the answers, and now if you guys just listen to me, like that's not going to fly. So part of what you did is by modeling the ways, you also modeled their way. I heard you mention you got some designations, you've got some education. Like, hey, I'm going to learn your language, I'm going to learn your customs, your cultures, your ways, and so I can understand it from your perspective. Because obviously, I mean, they're never, almost never, maybe somebody, but almost never are they doing it anything nefariously, right? They're doing their very best, but they've got limited knowledge. You're doing your best, you got limited knowledge. So you came with some humility. I think the idea is, as a leader, you got to come in with brass knuckles and clear vision. The answers is like, no, I'm coming in with humility, with respect, and you earn that. Then you could elevate the vision and say, hey, here's the vision. And then you can begin challenging the process, right? So, but there's an order of operations that you don't show up on day one, I'm going to challenge your process, because they're just going to reject you.
Absolutely. And I think that's where, a nice sort of the combo of sort of engineering, the structure of process and discipline, and the people side of things, right? I do believe that that is a critical balance, coming in and being able to very quickly demonstrate, here's the value that I can bring on day one. Yes, I have to learn some things. Yes, to your point, learning the language and synchronizing on things. But there were things, having over 25 years in service operations and having sat across the table from HR in this example for all that time, there were a number of things that I could bring to bear right away to help demonstrate to the organization that, hey, this guy's for real. Let's at least listen. And then coupled with all the other humanity type things and just employee engagement and just the servant, sort of attitude made the transition far less onerous than what it may have looked like on paper, right? For some. And I did have individuals say, are you kidding? Right? Why would you do that? Right? But for me, the transition was far less, had far less pain than maybe what folks thought it would have.
And then what was some of the impact that you ended up having? Can you tell us maybe one example of one thing that was changed? And what was one impact, like, something that we shifted during your tenure there that ended up advancing the business results?
Great question. I'll pick one, but because I came from operations to HR, the list was really long. So, but the one that I will cite specifically is, again, as I mentioned, HR had sort of migrated into a rules policy driven organization where everything was driven from a handbook or a piece of paper or a set of rules. And you have to have rules. So this is not an issue of saying you don't need rules, but one of the things I'm most proud of is we took a very different approach to handbooks and policies, which is my belief is you have to have rules and guidelines. You got to have them; they're appropriate. But if you overdo it, you really stifle the leaders in the organization where they don't think any longer. Every decision they go right to a book, right, and they say that's on page 7, that's number 13 on page 75. And the problem is when they are presented with just day-to-day issues and challenges from employees, if it's not in the binder, they have no idea how to react. And so for me, it was, let's reduce the number of policies, let's reduce the number of pages in the handbook, and let's allow, not require, mandate, but let's allow our leaders the opportunity to think, to feel, right, to be, and in the moment, totally change the culture of the organization because employees felt less like, again, here comes the principal, right, or leaders felt less like, okay, I now have to go to this book. And I took some satisfaction in watching leaders sort of evolve through this process because when they have fewer rules and they have fewer pages to rely on, I had the opportunity to watch them start to think again. And that was a beautiful thing to watch. It was challenging for some.
It sounds so amazing. Like everything's been scripted. There's a manual for everything. Like we are so rigorous and mature and robust. And you're like, yeah, but now you're archaic and you're frozen and your ability to adapt is going to be really constrained. And the analogy that's coming to my mind, John, and for those of you who are listening to this, John is a stately, studly gentleman who is a big football fan. You can see all kinds of football paraphernalia on his on along the wall there. But John, think about football, right? Like football has rules, right? And it has boundaries. If you step on this, you are out of bounds. If you do that, that's a flag. If you do that, that's a touchdown, right? Those are the rules, but that's not the coach's playbook. They're different, right? The rules set up the boundaries, but you would not want to play football where the refs are the coaches. So you need boundaries, yes, but then the coaches need to have their own playbook, and that allows for innovation with the plays and being able to call an audible, on the field, even with your local leaders there, and being able to read and adapt in an infinite permutation of ways, even though it's all still in the boundaries.
Absolutely, and I saw it play out real time again when this book of rules was presented, but something came up that wasn't in there, and it was, oh, now what do I do? And again, for me, it was watching leaders who would literally struggle with what to say and what to do, which is this is another human being across the table from you. You should not struggle with that, even if there's not a rule. And one of the things that I found throughout this process that I just enjoyed the evolution because I saw the growth, but it gave me an opportunity to also share with leaders that they were more prepared for this than they gave themselves credit for. For example, I would routinely share with leaders then and even now, which is for the leader who says, I can't have a difficult conversation. I struggle with that, or I can't deal with that issue because it's hard. I just ask the question, how many of you leaders, how many of you have children? How many of you have a significant other, right? How many of you have a family? And when you ask the question, say, and so how many times have you been in a situation with that audience where you didn't know what to say? The circumstance that was presented was nothing that had been presented before, but you had to decide in the moment, what do I do? And you leverage things like your care for those individuals or the relationship with them. What are you going to do that's in the collective best interest of all? And that's all I was trying to get the organization to do, was to empower and equip employees and leaders to think and to feel again. And when you have a booklet that's this thick that has all the rules and everybody's turning to a page, you lose that. That's like communication, right? Working in service operations for so many years, I was amazed over the years that because of things like texting and cell phones, the art of conversation was being lost. And so you had to go back and retrain. No, it's not in, 3-letter text where you gotta engage. You gotta put the other stuff away and look folks in the eyes and be in the moment, right? And feel. So it's all of that was I saw evolve over time, and it was great to watch.
That's such a great example. So since then, you moved back into operations. So you had that stint, you had those impacts, you built those, you got those merit badges, and so now you're at the helm of this great organization, having real positive impact on the quality of their lives, and you're across all the disciplines, right? And you're able to speak multiple languages with that. So let's shift now from how you as an individual leader had an adaptive career lattice, and now look at what are you doing, and what are the challenges that you're seeing and trying to help other leaders in order to be able to adapt and pivot to changing market conditions, because it's similar skill sets, but it's a different application and a different level of complexity.
Yeah, it really is. And one of the first things that I think is that you have to do is, one is you have to sort of pull back the veil and let them see the reality of what's out there, right? I think oftentimes companies, they try to keep things so contained or so in such a need to control the message that the leaders are just unaware that, oh no, the market is evolving to that extent, or things are that different. So it's just being transparent, showing here's what's really going on, and giving leaders an opportunity to engage in the reality of what's out there. And because then when you're going to the next thing, which is now let's now collaborate and figure out how are we going to compete. You have to allow, and I'm intentionally using words like allow, empower versus tell and force, because this is something that every individual has to embrace individually. But once you show them that, look, this landscape, and they can see the changes, now it is having the conversation where we're back to bringing all the voices to the table and allowing every unique voice to have input, where it is now how we attack this situation. What things can we do? What things are we not good at right now, that trying to go this way is going to be a challenge for us? What are we good at? So you show sort of the big picture, allow for it to be clear and transparent, and then you have discussion and dialogue that's authentic, that really points out things that you do well and not so well. And by doing that, you start to get to a short, reasonable, manageable, but also very clear list of things that says, here's how we can get after this. And back to your football analogy, it's also, while you're going through that process, you get an opportunity to place leaders, and leaders get to, they should self-identify, but if not, a good leader will help place them in the role that they can benefit and contribute the most, where they can contribute the most, and as a result get the most benefit. So just along those lines, it's a matter of, when you allow for those conversations to occur and all voices to be heard, you get a chance to then say, here's where you can have individuals contribute the most and give their best. And in return, when someone is contributing at a high level and able to leverage their strengths and their skills, they get more out of their daily work. And as a result, you're going to get more from them. And this is this flywheel, or this gift that keeps on giving.
Well, and get once again here in your incredible storytelling, John, you've identified, like, here are three kind of order of operations to do here. So let me just unwind that a little bit and try to see if I can summarize some of the finer points. So the first thing I heard you said is allow for them to be able to see what's really coming, not trying to protect them from what's scary out there, and so you use that word allow, and it's through dialogue and it's through discussion. So, having conversations about, well, what do you see and what do I see? Well, I see interest rates going up. I see interest rates going down. I see the labor market getting tighter. I see it getting more loose, right? And none of us has a crystal ball, right? But by having that dialogue, that's kind of step one, I'm hearing. And that's important, because a lot of folks, they think step one of strategy is goal setting. And, like, no, the step one of strategy is assessing the environment. How is the landscape changing? So we can then decide, where do we want to plant that flag, right? Step two then was, yes, from there, decide what your goals are for this period of time, this phase. But then it was like, okay, once you have that,
now allocate, right? Like look at the leaders that you have and you're like, okay, I've got an O-line dude here and I got a D-line gal here. And, don't make them the kickers, right? And vice versa. So, then it's allocating that leadership talent because, we talk about, do we have enough technicians? Do we have enough CSRs? Do we have enough whatevers? And it's like, but those leaders are a very scarce resource. Placing those according to their strengths, now there's been the dialogue so that they're aware of what's changing. There was the dialogue to develop the goals, and you're placing them in roles that plays to their strengths. That's the winning combination.
Absolutely. Absolutely right. Think about leaders, and you mentioned sort of scarcity. I've just seen over the course of my career so many leaders who, again, are well intended. But if you think about the impact that they have on the organization, yes, every individual contributor has an opportunity to impact your business, impact the customers that you work with. But I think about a leader who is typically responsible for a group of people, right? Whether that is 5, 10, 50, or whatever it is. And I've just seen it over the course of my career where some leaders, they have the title of leader, but they don't fully embrace and they don't display the behaviors, and they don't really focus on the fine print, right, or the other duties as assigned, right, which gets into the reality, which is they have the opportunity to either help build and grow an incredible organization or literally to destroy an organization, right? It can be really that polarizing. And so that's why I think it's really important. And I appreciate the work that you're doing to help equip leaders with insights from other leaders and other professionals to just help them add another tool to their tool belt, right? Because as a leader, if they only have a hammer, right, everything's a nail, right? Every situation is a nail. So they're going in hammering, which is that's not the tool you need for
And
this.
you're like, but that worked that one time. And you're like, yeah, because that was a
That was a
nail.
nail.
But,
This is not a nail. You're going to destroy everything. So that's why forums like this are so really important, because for every leader, self included, we're all just trying to continue to get additional tools to add to the tool belt.
So, John, could we zoom in just a little bit on that awareness of the changing forces there a bit? We talked about it as part of the overall context of the sequence, but you mentioned a great quote: "Consumers talk with their wallets and their feet." Right. So, what's maybe one way? I'm sure there's many. I don't need to ask you for the crown jewels here, but what's one way that right now you're helping facilitate those kind of dialogues with your leaders so they can see what's happening and not get stuck in that notion that we're predicting in a linear fashion. Again, it's a lattice, not a ladder. So is there something you guys do on maybe on a periodic basis, maybe at the beginning of the year, maybe quarterly, that you could share a tip for a leader out there to say, how would I elevate and facilitate that dialogue?
Absolutely. So one thing that we do, I've done it before, we do it here, which is to get leaders direct access to your customer base, right? And when I say that, it is you're not talking theoretical. It is hearing directly from your consumer. It's one of the best ways to really understand how are things changing. We will tend on the inside to have an idea and have, white papers about here's how you do this, or here's what's going on. And there's nothing better than to have an actual customer or group of customers come in and tell you that that's not what we think, right? That's not how we view this. That's not what we want. It helps modify your internal processes. It helps you refine your thinking around the products that you offer, how you market those products. And because they are the voice, right? And they are a very direct reflection of the environment and how it might change. And the interesting thing is, the more you get into the practice of talking to your customers, you get that real time change where sometimes you don't hear or see the news article or the white paper for some months. But if you can commit to talking to customers on a regular basis, you actually give yourself a head start on what the rest of the industry may find out. Because guess what? I talk to customers regularly, and I heard the shift in their thinking. I saw how they were approaching things. And as a result,
As it
as
was
it was
emerging.
emerging. Absolutely right. And that's one thing that I think has been particularly beneficial, because it just gives you more real time insight. And then you have to have the internal fortitude, right? To now that you've heard it, what are you going to do about it, right? It's one thing to just hear about changes and shifts. It's yet another thing to use that information to modify how you do business internally.
Great. So, John, in your case, then, you've got internal customers for some of your functions. Like we were talking HR earlier, right? Like, so for them, it would be going and talking to the hiring managers and the folks before. In your particular business context, Who would be an example of the voice of the customer? Is it is it a sample of the individual members? Is it your provider network? Give us just a specific example in your industry. When you say customer for you, maybe you have three types of customers. Who would they be?
Yeah. So on one hand, it's the government, right? We have a direct relationship with the Office of Personnel Management. So that's a government entity. So you have to be aware of things that are going on in the government space, right? Whether that is different shifts. So as there are, changes in elections and all else, that has a direct effect on government agencies, and as a result we have to be aware. The second is it's the actual customer. So because we serve federal employees and retired military personnel and their families, we have to be very well attuned to what's going on in those particular demographics. And so, yes, it's talking to federal employees directly. It's talking to retired military personnel and their families directly, because that gives us insight into the actual customer base, which is a part of. No, it's not the government, but it's all connected in terms of who we serve. And then you mentioned internally, so internal business areas, internal employees, understanding things there. So that's another direct employee. And I didn't mention, but I should, because they're one of our heaviest users and one of our most vocal clients. That's the provider community, right? I'm responsible for provider and network management. So we have to make sure that we are providing products and services that providers, whether that's doctors or dentists, products that and networks that they are willing to become a part of and willing to promote to those whom they serve. So those are audiences that can at any point in time have very different needs and very different expectations, and our ability to understand what those needs are and then again translate that into products we offer, processes, and the way that we deliver service, they're critical.
I like that because more and more, John, I think when you say talk to the customer, again, traditional models would say it's a linear customer relationship, right? There's a supplier, you do a process that goes out to a customer, right? A straight pass through, right? I buy the lumber from there, I build stuff, I sell it to you. But in your example, which I think is so representative of many industries, that again, it's back to this lattice, not a linear thing. You've got three different customer types that you're serving. You've got the government employers, you've got the providers, you have the actual members that are consuming and using those services. And so in each of those customers have different wants and needs, and sometimes even conflicting wants and needs. And that's okay. Like your job is to try to optimize the relationship between those three customer types. If a leader inside your organization only has a grip on the government employer perspective, or they only have a grip on the member perspective or whatever, right? They're not going to be able to see the dynamic landscape the way it evolves. So that was very helpful for you to give those specifics, because it's one thing to say go talk to the customers. It's just like you're like, but who is my customer? You're like, well, it might be three types. That's the nature of this lattice world we live in. All right, so we have this conversation. We think we've got a good understanding, having heard from these different customer types, and we've got the right players on the board. Then we hike the ball, and it all goes exactly as planned. Right. Let's talk about like the contingencies and the oopses. Like let's go to that part of the game. What are some skills and some tips that you would have for now the play is unfolding, right? And it was the right call at the right time, but now you're running it, and somebody's not where they're supposed to be, and somebody else is where you didn't think they were going to be. So tell us a little bit about how to be adaptable once the play's in motion.
Absolutely. The first thing I think you have to remind, the team that it's going to happen, right? So that it's not a surprise. One of the biggest things I've seen, in the corporate setting is for some reason leaders are surprised that projects go off the rails or that things don't go as they should. That should never be caught blindsided and thinking that, oh, this just can never occur. So one, it starts with some level of awareness that here are the potential things that could happen. So it's awareness. Number two is it's having a plan. So okay, this didn't go the way we wanted. So there's never an option to just stop. It is okay. What do you do next? And you have to be prepared. Whether that is upfront, having options, having if X then Y, if A then B. You can do that in advance. You may not have every scenario played out, but it is if this happens, we know what we're going to do. And it sometimes isn't even here is another solution. It is if this goes a way that we didn't intend, then we come together immediately to talk it through to figure out what we do next, right? So it's not always having all the answers in the moment. It's having a plan or a process that says, if something doesn't go the way that we want, we know how to come back together, i.e. a huddle, to figure out, okay, what do we do next? Wrapped around all of that or underpinning that is it's back to having a plan. No team comes into a game having we have one play on the play sheet. You gotta have options, and you have to have options that you believe are realistic based on the circumstance that you're in. So you don't have a one size fit all. It is we have these multiple things that we could consider, and depending on circumstance, we'll pull this lever, we'll engage this team, we'll do this thing based on where we are. But I think first and foremost, I really do think it starts with attitude. I would encourage a leader to be aware that things happen. Things don't always go the way that they're supposed to, and having resilience and the ability to say, this didn't go the way that I expected, but I can pivot. And let me quickly pivot to the thing that may work. And guess what? That second thing you do may not work either, right? So it is what is next, right? So having the ability to adapt and to move and not be overwhelmed or totally downtrodden because this did not work, I think is one of those key attributes of a leader that they'll leverage throughout their entire career. The ability to fail. If you're going to fail quickly and move on to the next thing, right? Don't no need to wallow in it.
Well, John, there was two things that I heard in that. One was kind of like the different progression of different leaders, and then one was this notion of the flexibility and with the contingency and the options. But it's like the lowest level, the hapless, helpless leader is one that says it's not even worth trying. Like we're doomed, we're gonna die, right? The next step up is the leader says, well, I'm just gonna do something, but they don't have a plan, they don't have a goal, right? And the next step up is they've got a clear goal, like yeah, that's the direction we want to go, but they're just kind of running, wild. They don't really have a plan. So, and those are all like, well, sure, sure. But then you made the distinction that says, the successful leader not only has a goal, not only has a plan, but has multiple plans. And they go in with the expectation that a good percentage of the time, all or some parts of those plays are not going to do what you want them to do. And I think the key in all of that is managing expectations, right? If your expectation is as a leader, you're going to gain ground on every play, you're going to score a touchdown on every play, everything's going to go the way you think. That's as silly as thinking like my career is going to be a straight ladder and every step's going to lead to that. You're setting yourself up for such a tremendous amount of stress. You're stressed, you're less creative, you're less effective, and it's a self-sabotaging cycle.
It really is. And you're more likely when you fall into that particular vicious cycle that, oh no, this didn't go well. So now I'm ready to just pack it in and go. You never reach your individual full potential because it is the constant start and stop. The stop in this sense is I'm going to stop learning, growing, and pushing through those obstacles, right? Knowing that, okay, that didn't work. Let me go to the other thing. And that I've seen again a number of leaders who I believe had the potential to do far greater things, but it was because the lack of resilience and the lack of having, you'll hear in sports or other things where it's the short memory, meaning, okay, this didn't work. What else do we have that we can go to? Go to that thing and let's get that to work. If that doesn't work, what is the next thing? Let's get that to work. And sometimes leaders run out of patience, and as a result, they become very defeated. And a defeated leader that starts within. A defeated leader is of very little value to an organization. And if you think about, the plays, the corporate decisions, the things that work, it's when you have, okay, we did this, it did not work, but then you have the individuals who were, in the trenches and doing the work or hearing the feedback, passing that information back saying, okay, no, it didn't work, but I can tell you why it didn't work. You don't throw a play away totally forever because it didn't work. You're waiting on feedback from the team, the leaders to say, okay, this did not work, but I'm close enough to it and paid enough attention to know why. So here is an environment, a scenario where it has a greater likelihood of working. And that's again from the collaboration amongst all team members, like it would be within a corporate setting, just like it would be on a sports team where you have teammates that they talk to each other, right? They share what works and what doesn't work. And so it helps refine the process. It helps refine the next decision, the next step. But it all so much translates from corporate to field of play, you name it. There are some principles that they just are critically important and they work.
One little nugget you had shared with me earlier was this notion of the power of unscripted conversations, right? To be able to facilitate and foster that type of feedback and learning, it's like, well, why should you be regular in communications? Like, well, I don't really have anything to talk about. And you're like, really? You don't have anything to talk about with your business partner, with a customer, or with one of your employees? You're just like, how could you say you don't have anything to talk? And I'm not talking about extrovert, introvert. I'm just saying, is there a topic for discovery that you might see better than I do, or I might be more aware of than you are, that could benefit from a dialogue? All right. And just to ask the question, what are you seeing right now? Or what's working, what's not working? What do what's coming up next for you? Those unscripted conversations can sometimes allow us to be able to see how the curvature of the landscape is changing, allow us to see why that play didn't work, to see how that player could be in a better role, in a technical role versus in a customer facing role or whatever, right?
That's right. And I shared sort of the example before that is I've found myself having to encourage leaders because it is sometimes difficult. The unscripted conversation is sometimes more difficult, but it is the one that I believe truly adds the most value. Why? Because number one, you're inviting perspectives and thoughts that are different than your own. And any great product, any great process is a result of there being multiple insights, right, and multiple inputs from different people to get to that best solution. And I found myself again over the course of many years encouraging leaders that again they are better at this than what they give themselves credit for. The moment your teenager walks in and has something, they're going to bring you a topic that you weren't prepped for this, right? There's no manual for this one, but you got to deal with it, right? It's impromptu. It is unscripted, but you have to have it, and they have had it. And so I remind leaders that that conversation you had to have with your teenager. Yeah, you've seen it before, right? You've seen it, and it helps. Number one, just build the confidence, but two, it's something that I don't believe can be eternally avoided, right? That unscripted conversation. People may not like it, they may not want to do it, but it's going to happen. And so it's a matter of saying, let's get good at this, right? The unscripted conversation, not only because it's going to happen inevitably, but because it's through those types of conversations that you really get to a richness of dialogue and output that you benefit from. Definitely.
Love it, love it. John, this has been an amazing conversation. I like how you've taken us from, how do you adapt your career as an individual, all the way through how do you help a team be more adaptable as they continue to play on the marketplace.
All right, I appreciate it. Thanks, Lee.
Thank you for joining us today on the Unleashing Leaders podcast. Subscribe so you don't miss a moment that could be the key to your next breakthrough. Let's stay connected and contribute together by grabbing that @Unleashing Leaders handle on LinkedIn, YouTube, or your favorite network. This is Lee Scott. Keep learning, loving, and leading. Our future and our communities are counting on us.